I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the new Audi SQ8. Yes, it's been out in European markets for a few months now, but this is the first time it's been offered in Australia. It arrives this week, and not only does the SQ8 look pretty cool and a little bit meaner than the already distinctive Q8 SUV outside, but it also brings a performance engine to the range here in Australia for the first time. And that performance option is a diesel V8, which is a rare kind of engine really now in Australia, even in these fast SUVs. And that's a shame because this 4-litre engine gives the SQ8 plenty of go, but also decent fuel efficiency. But unlike the SQ7, with which it shares many of its components, the SQ8 isn't going to be the fastest of the Audi Sport Q8s. An RSQ8, which is going to be significantly hotter again with an 8-cylinder petrol engine, will be coming out later this year, and that ought to be pretty cool. But for now, this is as quick as the Q8 gets, and I've got a bit of a soft spot for this Audi SUV. It's pretty good to drive with the base V6 petrol engine, and you will also be able to get it now with a V6 diesel as well. But the SQ8 shares many of those virtues. Jumping into the cabin here, it is a nice place to spend time. Pretty plush, pretty opulent, especially because Australia's version of the SQ8 comes standard with almost all of the features already ticked. They include things that you'd expect to be optional, like Audi's very highest grade of leather here on the seats, a panoramic sunroof, and Bang & Olufsen audio, all of which is fitted to the Q8 without having to spend any more money, which is nice. So is this technology package, which is Audi's latest version of its both interior design and its infotainment software. And it works pretty well if you're into touchscreens, that is. The screens are bright, crisp and clear, and they're very responsive to the touch, which is good. Plus, it works very well with the wireless Apple CarPlay, which you get as standard. But unfortunately, the Q8 has never been offered with Audi's hardware-driven, rotary dial system for controlling the screens, which works well on bumpy roads, and we have a lot of those here in Australia. Instead, everything's touch-driven, including the temperature and fans, so you just have to get used to it. But you do get used to it. There's a bit of a curve, but it's a fairly shallow one. Plus, you can drive most of the features through the active info display here in front of the driver, which looks great. It delivers 4G powered satellite mapping, which makes it really cool and easy to see the environment around you. You feel like a really good driver because you can see what's coming up next. And of course, you're enjoying good sound quality as well from those great speakers. The seats themselves are comfy. The leather finish is really plush. They're very adjustable, and the view out is good because even though the Q8 is a coupe SUV, technically, the roofline isn't anywhere near as sloping as a Mercedes GLE Coupe or a BMW X6. It's a lot more sensible, and we'll see how you reap those benefits in the back as well. One thing I will say before moving on though is that this piece of piano black plastic here, which you get on all of these high-end Audis with the dual touchscreen setup, it does have a bit of a tendency to rattle around on bumpy roads, which doesn't sound particularly lush. But largely, up front, it's very nice in the SQ8. Here in the back of the SQ8, which you access through big doors, frameless glass, looks pretty swish. The amount of room on offer is good. So for myself at 6 foot, if I sit up straight, I've got another inch or two of headroom. Legroom is massive. Tow room is good as well. Now this is only a 5-seater. If you want 7 seats, the SQ7 is similar but a little bit more practical. But you can get 3 adults across the back here really easily because there's virtually no hump in the floor, and this middle seat is decently sized. Plus, comfort in the back is good. The seats are shapely, really nice leather finishing on the door tops in this SQ8 and Alcantara below. So, it feels like a really lovely, comfortable place to spend time here in this car. Plus, we have 4 climate zones, so each back seat can choose their own temperature and even fan setting, plus seat heating, and 2 USB ports and a 12-volt socket complete the picture here in the back. Now, around at the back is where we can perhaps see most easily that this isn't a Q7. The Q8 and this SQ8 really do have their own personality. Now, you'll be able to pick an SQ8 easily by the fact that it sports quad tailpipes, which is a hallmark of Audi's S cars. Now, 2 of them are real, 2 of them are closed off per side, but that still, pretty much passes the real pipe test, in my opinion. Now, we have an electric tailgate, which opens up nice and smartly with that full-length LED light running through the back, opening to reveal a really large boot with a chrome finisher to protect the paintwork, heaps of space for bags. And because the Q8 Sportback's roofline isn't as cut away, you don't lose as much space for your suitcases. And I think that slightly longer roof on this coupe SUV helps to make it just look better than the GLE Coupe and the X6. I think it's a significantly more resolved looking car, and I think it just helps that there's a slightly less steep rake on that back windscreen. But that's my theory. You let me know what you reckon below the video. But now, let's jump into the driver's seat of this performance diesel SUV. So what is the SQ8 like to drive? Well, we already liked the way the Q8 drove with the 55 TFSI engine, which in normal speak is a turbocharged V6 engine with 250 kilowatts of power. So what happens when you throw a 4-litre twin-turbo diesel V8 with 320 kilowatts of power, horsepower up on the screen there, and 900 Newton meters of torque at this Audi SUV? How does it respond? Well, pretty well. This is a really good competent chassis running the Volkswagen Group and Audi's MLB longitudinal modular matrix platform, and we know that this thing can handle plenty of power and torque, and so it goes in the SQ8. It's a really nice sorted SUV, and adding a bit more power just enhances the benefits of this product, in my opinion. And this engine is a really lovely one. I mentioned up front that a diesel V8 is becoming a rare form of powertrain, even though it's a really good fit for these larger and heavier SUVs, because while you're sort of touring reasonably quickly, it'll return 10 or 11 litres per 100 kilometres, and not much more than that in town. Whereas if you put a petrol V8 in, which they have done for the RS Q8, you'll easily see double those sorts of numbers without trying too hard. So there are some clear benefits to sticking with this oil-based solution. But the dominant characteristic is really that torque. 900 Newton meters is plenty, and you can just put down your foot in virtually any circumstance and just feel that feeling in the pit of your stomach of just being pushed forward. It's quite intoxicating, and one of the best parts of driving the SQ8 or its colleague, the SQ7. The engine also sounds pretty good, certainly not diesely. When you get a 6-cylinder or an 8-cylinder diesel, they don't typically exhibit that agricultural rattling that is common in 4-cylinder diesels, so it sounds pretty refined, pretty muscular, pretty good. So how does it handle? Well, certainly it handles better than you'd expect for an SUV of this size. The SQ8 is still over 5 meters long, so it's a fairly large vehicle. It's really wide, and it's over 2 tons in mass, so you'd expect it to be quite cumbersome. But particularly if you're quite specific with your specification and you go for one particular option package that really helps, this thing is fairly talented to drive, let's put it that way. If you opt for the $11,000 dynamic package, you delete the steel sway bars from the car and they are replaced with an electromechanical stabilization system that plays with the air suspension fed off the 48-volt electrical architecture in this vehicle. And that effectively means you get almost perfectly flat cornering, and that's quite impressive. The Continental tires on the SQ8 give you a good amount of grip as well, and you certainly don't feel like you're going to slide off the road in terminal understeer. Quite the opposite. It tucks in really nicely. It's got a really decent, responsive front end despite that weight from this big heavy diesel. But, it pulls off a sports SUV persona really nicely. One thing I will say though is that the SQ8 interestingly feels a little bit softer than the SQ7. The SQ7 is really flat in the corners and the suspension is firm but not uncomfortable. I would suggest that the SQ8 it has a little bit more roll and the suspension is a little bit softer and a little bit more plush. And if I was being completely candid, I would have said that I expected the opposite. I would have thought the Q7 would be the slightly more plush one given its sort of family hauler credentials, but this is the way the dice have rolled, in fact. And that plush ride quality is a benefit most of the time because it gives the SQ8 really long legs, eating up country miles really nicely. Refinement's pretty good too. It's a little bit louder in the cabin than the SQ7, but that's probably more down to tyres than differences in noise insulation, which is likely to be more or less identical. We have Contis here on the SQ8, Hancooks on the SQ7. It's probably just a difference in the loudness of the tread pattern, really. As I mentioned, visibility out is good despite the fact, know, this is technically a coupe SUV because it doesn't have that harsh roofline. It's not so bad. Another highlight is the sheer stopping power of the SQ8 with its 400mm diameter front discs and 350mm at the back, so there's heaps of stopping power. That's one reason why it needs 22-inch wheels, is to fit the brakes underneath them. And those 22-inch wheels, they actually still manage to have just a little bit of sidewall, 40 series, so you know, it's not completely crashy or uncomfortable in town. In fact, it's quite livable. There's also a significant amount of safety systems in the SQ8. We have high-speed AEB, adaptive cruise control, lane keep assist that's quite strong, front and rear cross-traffic alert, so that you're not able to drive into the path of a perpendicular vehicle at a junction, which is always nice, so you do feel looked after. And of course, it's a large, solid feeling crossover, so it has that sense of security about it anyway. So those are our detailed opinions of the 2020 Audi SQ8. I reckon this SUV is very likeable from a driving dynamics perspective, and that engine is very, very difficult to argue with. My personal view is that the SQ7 makes a little bit more sense because you get the extra practicality of a third row and as good driving dynamics, really. I think if you're going for one of these in 5-seat form, you should think long and hard about whether you want a large SUV or whether something like Audi's own RS4 wagon or the forthcoming RS6, if you want to go crazy, makes even more sense and is significantly better to drive. But I get the appeal of this big bruiser. It's pretty cool. Let me know what you think about the SQ8 down below this video. While you're down there, make sure to hit subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.